Inside a sealed greenhouse in England, a bean plant began arming itself against nothing. The answer is hiding in the soil beneath its roots, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. There were no aphids on its leaves. No insect had touched it. The air around it was filtered and still, sealed off from every neighbor in the room. And yet, over a matter of hours, this plant switched on the exact chemistry it uses to fight off a swarm, releasing the scent that repels aphids and summons the insects that hunt them. It was preparing for a war that, as far as it could possibly know, was not happening. A few feet away, behind a barrier it could not see through, another bean plant was being eaten alive. That plant was crawling with aphids. The two were not touching. They shared no air. By every assumption a botanist held in 2013, the healthy plant should have stood there, oblivious, until the swarm found it too. Instead, it raised its defenses early, as if it had been told. Something had carried the warning across the gap between them, silently, invisibly, underground. This is the case of a plant that screams without a sound, and the hidden line that carries the message. The report came out of a British research team in 2013, working with one of the most ordinary plants in any garden, the broadbean. In the lab it goes by Vicia faba, but it is the same green bean plant millions of people grow for food. The researchers raised their beans in pots, grouped together, and let an underground partner move in with them, a mycorrhizal fungus, the thread-like organism that wraps around plant roots and trades nutrients for sugar. Almost every plant on Earth lives with one. The fungus spreads through the soil as a fine web of filaments, and crucially, a single web can link several plants at once, root to root, like cabling buried in the dark. Then the team staged an attack. They placed aphids, specifically the pea aphid, onto one plant in each group and let the insects feed. They sealed each plant inside its own bag so no scent could drift through the air to its neighbors. The only thing some neighbors still shared with the infested plant was that underground fungal web. Others had been deliberately cut off from it. Then the researchers waited and measured what chemicals each untouched neighbor was giving off. What they found in the connected plants was not supposed to be possible. The first objection was obvious. The warning must have traveled through the air. Plants under attack are known to release airborne scents, volatiles, that drift to their neighbors and prime them to defend. If even a trace of that scent leaked between the plants, the whole result would collapse into something already well understood. So the design had to rule it out. Each plant sat inside its own sealed bag, and the air was kept from passing between them. The connected neighbors that responded had breathed none of the infested plant's air. The second objection was the soil itself. Maybe a chemical had simply diffused through the wet ground, root to root, with the fungus playing no part at all. To separate the two, the team used a fine mesh buried in the soil. The holes were small enough to let the slender fungal threads grow through, but the barrier could be turned to break that fungal link while leaving the soil and its water connected. When the fungal thread was cut but the soil still touched, the warning stopped arriving. That killed the idea of a signal merely leaking through groundwater. One explanation remained, and it was the one nobody wanted to say out loud, because it meant the plants were using the fungus as a wire. But a control is not proof. They needed the measurement. A bean plant that no insect has touched can still switch on a full chemical defense, and the trigger comes from underground. This was the measurement that could not be argued away. The researchers collected the air around every untouched neighbor and analyzed exactly what each one was emitting. The results split cleanly along one line: connection. The neighbors still wired to the infested plant through the fungal web had turned on their anti-aphid chemistry. They were giving off the blend of scents that aphids avoid, and at the same time, the blend that draws in the aphid's natural enemy. They were not just hunkering down. They were calling in the wasps, the parasitoid kind that lay their eggs inside aphids and kill them from within. The neighbors whose fungal link had been severed did none of this. Same soil, same water, same species, same room, but cut off from the web, they sat chemically silent, as exposed as if no alarm had ever sounded. And there it is, a plant raising its defenses against an attack it cannot see, smell, or feel. The only difference between the plants that knew and the plants that did not was a single thread of fungus in the dark. The signal was real, it was specific, and it traveled in the soil. The bean experiment did not stand alone for long, and in fact it was not even first. 3 years earlier, in 2010, a separate group working with tomato plants had run a similar test. They infected one tomato with a leaf rot disease, linked it to healthy neighbors through the same kind of fungal web, and watched the neighbors switch on disease-fighting defenses before the infection ever reached them, but only the neighbors that shared the fungal network. A pathogen in one corner of the soil was putting plants on alert in another. Different threat, different plants, same hidden channel. Other teams pressed on the idea from new angles. Researchers traced how broad beans linked by fungi shared not just alarm, but resources, shunting carbon and defensive compounds between plants through the threads. Work on Douglas fir seedlings, using carbon tags so it could be tracked, showed sugars flowing from older trees into younger shaded ones along the fungal links. Proof the network carried real cargo, not just chemistry. Each study used a different subject and a different instrument, and each landed on the same uncomfortable conclusion the bean team had reached. The soil under our feet is not a passive medium. It is a communication line, and the plants are on it. The pattern was now too consistent to dismiss. Bean plants, it turns out, are wired into a vast underground network that scientists now compare to an internet for plants. Among researchers, the argument is largely over. The fungal threads that lace through soil, linking plant to plant across a field or a forest floor, are now widely accepted as a route by which plants exchange chemical signals, and the system has earned a nickname that stuck: the Wood Wide Web. What the public still pictures as a quiet, passive lawn, biologists now read as a crowded switchboard, humming with traffic we cannot hear. When one plant is attacked, the alarm can ripple outward through the soil to its connected neighbors, and those neighbors brace before the threat arrives. The consensus is careful about what this is not. The plants are not thinking, and the fungus is not a selfless messenger. It takes sugar from every plant it touches, and it may carry these signals for reasons that have nothing to do with kindness. There is even evidence the line can be turned against a plant, with some species using it to leak chemicals that stunt their rivals. But the core claim, that a warning can travel plant to plant underground and change how an untouched plant behaves, is no longer fringe. It is in the textbooks. Most people simply never heard. And yet the most basic question is still open. We can prove the warning travels, and we can prove the connected plant responds before the threat arrives. What we still cannot say is what, exactly, the message is. No one has isolated the signal moving through the fungal thread, whether it is a specific molecule riding the filaments, a faint electrical pulse, a change in the fungus itself, or something no instrument has yet been pointed at. We know the line is live. We know a plant under attack puts its neighbors on alert. We simply do not know the words. A plant is speaking to the plants around it in a language carried through the body of another organism entirely, and we are standing over the wire, listening, without yet knowing how to read it.